Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing fantastic. If you're watching this, you are obviously interested in Cisco's Catalyst SD-WAN, and you have come to the right place. This video is part of a larger SD-WAN series and will be focused on the three different controllers that make up the control plane of Cisco's SD-WAN solution. They are Manager, which was formerly vManage, Validator, which was formerly vBond, and Controller, which was formerly vSmart. Now, if you've seen any of my other series, or for those of you whom it's your first time, I try to gear my labs more towards what a real-life topology or use case would look like. So with all that being said, let me share my screen. So this is the design guide for Cisco's Catalyst SD-WAN. I want to highlight the use case that I'm going to try to architect here in this lab. So if we go to the control components deployment section, and if we scroll down, they talk about the various different ways to set up the high availability. You can have clusters of manager, clusters of validator, and clusters of controller, or pools, if you will. The problem is that these, especially manager, it's so resource intense that I can really only afford to spin up one of them. If I try to spin up more than one, I just don't have the resources to accommodate. So I'm taking a different spin on what I can deploy in my lab and still kind of gear it towards a real life example. So right here they show the various data centers, right? So and you have multiple controllers that live in each of the data centers. And what you can do is your branch routers, you can essentially dictate which data centers or control connections they make. So that's kind of the way we're going to structure this. And then the manager and the validator can live like in a cloud instance. In my case, I'm calling it AWS. So let's look at the lab itself. So this is the end goal through the series that we want to essentially get to together. So for I just want to show this high level, and then we'll zoom in on the actual task at hand, which is the controllers. So at the top, we have AWS, which is site 99. And you can see that validator and manager are positioned there, and they'll have internet connectivity that will essentially be able to communicate with the other sites, in our case, the data centers for this video. On the right, there's DC1, data center 1, and you can see that I've positioned 3 controllers inside of that data center. And likewise, on the left, we have data center 2, and I've positioned 3 controllers in data center 2. Now, these controllers are going to run in their own instance of Cisco modeling labs that I have here. And let's hop over to that instance. So that's here. And now the view is a little bit more zoomed in on the controller. So this is where we're going to spend our time together today. So as you can see, the controllers are all powered off at the moment. So what I'm going to do for starters is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start all of the controllers. And while they're booting, we'll go through the base configs that we're going to paste onto the various devices. So this is obviously going to take a few minutes. It's actually going to tax my machine pretty hard because again, it's very resource intense. But I just want to make sure that these start to come up. Okay, so slowly working their way over, and then we have 3 more controllers that just need to go green here. So we'll check back in on those in a minute. In the meantime, let's look at the configurations. So starting with AWS Manager, this is the base config that we're going to paste on once the box is up and running. And this will get us the connectivity on the simulated internet VLAN, which is the 172.16.11 dot. And once we have this configuration on the box and there's network reachability, then we'll go to the next step, which will be to access the graphical user interface and start to play with the certificates. Now, that does bring up a good point. So before I go and show all the configs, the other piece to this puzzle is you need some type of mechanism to generate certificates or sign CSRs. So in my case, I'm using a Windows Server domain controller that's going to not only run Active Directory, it's going to run domain name system, the DNS, and it's also going to run the certificate authority role, which is what I'm going to use to sign all the CSRs from these various controllers. So let's hop back to the configs here. So all the configs are going to look very similar. So it's nothing more than just go into the system configuration and set a host name, an identifier, IP address, system IP, which doesn't have to be routable. It's just an identifier, the site ID, the org name, which in my case, I'm going to use XLAN. That's the actual domain that my domain controller is running. It's called XLAN. I'm going to set the time zone and network time protocol just so that there's no drift. And then we're just going to use VPN 0 across all the controllers. And that's where the IP address is going to be assigned to ETH0 on the various boxes or virtual machines. Now, two things I want to highlight. If you read the documentation, they say to use an FQDN, fully qualified domain name, for the VBond, right? It's because if you want to incorporate more, I'll say VBonds just because that's the syntax, they're using the old syntax, but if you want to deploy more VBonds in the future to do clustering or high availability, if you were to put an IP address here, you'd be kind of screwed. You wouldn't be able to do that. So use an FQDN, and that way DNS will essentially handle any request if you want to add additional VBonds. That's why they make that recommendation. So I'm doing that, and then you can basically, here's the little host entry, which will say, oh, by the way, the vbond.xlan.com, that IP address that it belongs to is actually 11.52. All right. So, and then you just got to stick a default route. In this case, the default route isn't necessary in my topology because all of the controllers are actually going to live on the same subnet. So it's just one big broadcast domain, so they'll be able to communicate without the route. But just for sanity's sake, I'm throwing in a route. So in theory, these would all have real internet connectivity outside of my lab. So this is literally the config that we're going to paste on the manager that's going to be living in AWS. The validator, which is also going to live in AWS, right? Very similar configuration. The only difference is it's going to get the 52 address as opposed to 51. Hopping over to the DC1, we're going to have controller 1, 2, and 3. So this is controller 1. The important piece for this configuration is that if we were to go back to that design guide on Cisco's site, these controllers that make up the various different or live in the various different data centers, they should be part of controller groups, group IDs, as you can see here, right? So data center 1 in this example is group ID 1, data center 2 is 2, so on and so forth. So I'm using that same logic in my sorry, let me get back to the configs. So I'm using that same exact logic for my example. So anything in data center 1 that's a controller, it's going to be part of controller group ID 1. So that's all we're doing there. And then we're going to change that IP address to be the respective IP based on our key on the topology. So controller 2, only thing different here is the name and the IP address. Okay. Going to controller 3, just a different name, different IP address. Now, if we hop over to the data center 2 configurations, we can see now the controller group ID becomes 2. The host name changes as well as the IP address, and obviously the site ID as well. So controller 2 in DC2, just so you can see it, and controller 3 in DC2. Sorry, this should be site ID 2. There's a typo there. Okay. So they're the base configs that we're going to be slapping on the boxes once they boot. Let's see where we stand there. So everything's green. Let me go over to Secure CRT. So I've went ahead and created, CML has a built-in console server ability, and I've created all of the sessions that I need for this lab. So I'm going to just say connect in tabs, and Once all these devices boot up and are on, I should say, giving me a console access, we'll come back and we'll start to paste those configs in together. So I'm going to pause the recording here until all the devices boot up for the first time, and then we'll pick up together, hopefully in a few minutes here. Okay, at this point, all of the boxes have started up and they're up with a console. So let me just point out one thing. If you click on any one of them, for Cisco Modeling Labs, it's going to default the SD-WAN controllers to having a username of admin and a password of Cisco. So when we go to log in, we're going to use those credentials. So at this point, I have a session up in Secure CRT to all 8 controllers. So I'm going to, and they're all sitting at a login prompt. So I'm going to send the command admin Cisco to all of the sessions, and what we should see is that they are all logged in, but they have no configuration on them. So insert host name here. If I were to do a show run, there's literally nothing configured at all, with the exception of that username and password that I've kind of pointed out, right? So let's go back to our base configs. So if we start with from left to right, we'll just basically copy and paste our template configs in. So there's going to be a little repetition here, so just bear with me while I get these configs on here. Okay, that one took to paste. It always gets hung on this first command here. The validator wants this encapsulation. So I just wanted to make sure that I took it. Okay, 3 more controllers to go. Oops. Okay. Now, if we go to, let's just go to manager and let's do ping VPN 0 172.16.11.52 61 62 63, then 71 72 and 73. So that's all the controllers, basically just sending a ping from manager to the other 7 controllers. It looks like reachability is there. Now, if we head back, let's go ahead and open a new tab, and let's go to '51. Okay, so it looks like the graphical interface for the manager has loaded. So there's a verification command. So let's come back over to the CLI. If you do a request NMS all status, This will basically output all of the services that the box is running. So what you want to see is that they're all, the most important one is the application server, this one here. So you really want to see, the majority of the services up and running. And if they're running, but they haven't ran for long enough time, you might get a message on the graphical interface that says like, basically it's still trying to load. But at this point, it looks like we're good. Let me just refresh. I'm going to log in with admin Cisco. And it should spit out a bunch of warnings and alerts because this is the first time we're logging in. So it wants us to, authenticate our smart account and all that stuff. I'm just going to say, do not show this message again. Don't show again. Skip for now. Let's get rid of these two warnings. And yes, we are aware that there's certificate issues, right? That's literally the next step that we're going to take here together. So upon logging in for the first time, we're going to go to administration and we're going to go to settings. We're going to scroll down to system organization name, and it's going to ask us for our password, which is Cisco. For the organization name, my domain and the org that I'm using that we defined is XLAN. So I'm going to put XLAN and I'm going to save that. Now for the validator, it says put in either the FQDN or the IP address. So as I had said earlier, we want to use the FQDN. So we're going to say vbond.xlan.com. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to save that. And then there's one other piece that we want to configure. We're going to go down to trust and privacy. We're going to go to the controller certificate authorization. And since I'm running a Microsoft Windows domain controller running the CA role, I'm going to change this to be enterprise root certificate. Now it's asking us for a file. So where do we get that file? I'm going to go over to my cert server. Okay, so this is the Windows server that I keep alluding to. And if I go to the cert serve, I'm going to basically say download a CA cert. And this is going to, I want to download the root CA. All right, so I'm going to change this to base 64. I'm going to download the CA certificate. My browser is going to say, this is an unsecure file. Do you want to keep it? Yes, I do. And now I'm going to just rename that downloaded file to be something more descriptive. So I'm going to call it XLAN CA. So now I know that that is the root certificate. So now that that's downloaded, if I go back to the page we were just at on Manager, I'm going to say select the file and I'm going to point it to that certificate file. So it populates the certificate and I'm going to go ahead and say import and save. Okay, it was successful, so that's good. Now, after those three things have been done, we can actually start to bring in the rest of the controllers into the configuration. So how do we do that? We go to configuration, and under certificates, controller components, the first thing we need to do is we need to install the certificate for the manager, okay? You can see that it says no certificate installed. So we need to go ahead and get one installed. So we need to generate a certificate signing request. So we're going to go ahead and generate a CSR. So it presents us with that CSR, which I'm going to just copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to go back to my certificate authority and I'm going to say request a certificate. I'm going to paste that CSR output into the window. And from there, I'm going to say, go ahead and submit, sign my certificate, and I'm going to download that certificate. So if I go back to that directory, I'm going to go ahead, same story. I'm just going to call this Manager 01. And then I should go back to Manager. I'm going to close this generation window out. And now I'm just going to click on Install Certificate. I'm going to select that file. And I'm going to say Install. We can see that the status changed to scheduled. And if we give this a few seconds here, we should see it change. So it's in progress. And with any luck, it should go green and say success momentarily. Perfect. Now, if we go back to this main certificates page, we now see that a certificate serial number, we see an expiration date, and right, everything looks better now. If we go to monitor devices, we can see it now knows that it says site 3. This should be site 99. I think I typoed something here. Let's go ahead and change this. This was a typo on my part. So the two AWS boxes should, based on the topology, sit in site 99. So let's go ahead and copy and paste that. Let's go back to Secure CRT, to the manager. Let's paste that. And then let's do the same thing for Validator. Okay. Now, if we go back to the graphical interface, if we may need to, it's either going to take a second. Okay, there it is. Perfect. So it just needed the refresh. So now it's indicative of site 99. So that's better. All right. Now that manager is essentially configured with the org name, the vbond address, the certificate authority being enterprise CA, and it has a cert, we should now be able to onboard the rest of our controllers. So we need to go under configuration, devices, controller components, and we essentially just have to do these one at a time. So I'm going to add the validator first. So we're going to say validator, and we're going to put in the IP address based on our topology. So we know that it should be 11.52. Admin Cisco, and we're going to say, yeah, go ahead and generate a CSR. So it adds it, but we have to come over to configuration, certificates, and then controller components. And we should see CSR generated, okay? But there's no certificate installed because we have to get it signed by our CA. So let's view the CSR. And this is where it gets repetitive. So we just take that CSR, we come back to our certificate authority, we request a new cert. And again, it's just rinse and repeat at this point. So AWS Validator 01. And when we hit install, it should know that the file we point to is for the validator. changes to in progress. With any luck, it should be successful. And notice it's using the system IPs, not the actual routable IPs. So now we have a cert installed, and we don't have to come back to monitor. I just want to kind of point it out. So if we come back to monitor devices, they're going to slowly basically populate in this list as we add them, right? It's going to know the site IDs. It's going to know that, again, the system IP addresses. It'll tell us how many TLOCs and control sessions there are as we go. So literally the only thing I have to do is do the same exact process for the next 6 controllers. And at this point, we're just going to be adding controllers, right? So add controller. And I think we're in the 61 range now. So 61, 62, and 63 are our next 3 controllers. So we got to, if we hit refresh, it should show CSR generated. So at this point, what I'll most likely do is I'm going to obviously do this while I record, and then most likely I'll just kind of, when I cut this and edit it, I'll fast forward through this section because there's no need for the same exact thing to be demonstrated 5 more times. So I just want to make sure that the next couple go smooth, which it certainly appears that they are. So slowly but surely, this list will be populated with the rest of the controllers, and we can see the control and TLOCs are all being built. So that's a great sign. So again, I'm just going to kind of go through. I'm not going to be talking because I'm just going to add the next bunch of controllers, and then we'll pick back up once everything's in place. Okay, so we're back in real time here. So you can see all 8 controllers are now part of the fabric, if you will. They're all in their respective sites. Everything's in sync. We see the system IPs all line up with the exact design that we wanted for or we were going for. So let's go to monitor, overview, devices. We can see that everything looks kosher here as well, right? So I believe we're at a good spot. So at this point, we've got all the controllers in place. Let's just double check our 51, 52, 61 to 63, 71 to 73. Everything's in the right place. We caught the mistake that I had the typo with the site. That's been resolved. Site 99 is now in play, which we can see here. So again, I think we're in a great spot to stop. So we've laid the foundation for the SD-WAN fabric. The next step will be to start to onboard some routers. to get to that end state. And the next video, I want to kind of demonstrate why we position the controllers the way we did. So when we onboard the routers, we'll have some commands that we can put in place that will dictate how the control connections are essentially brought up and who they're brought up with. So I hope to see you on the next video. I hope this was informative. Thank you for your time. Take care.